Good afternoon. Welcome to TNC Radio.live. This is the Truckers Network radio show, and here's your host, Shelley Johnson.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Yes, this is the Truckers Network radio show on TNC Radio.live, where we offer the news, sports, traffic, weather, information, and entertainment our commercial drivers want and need. There are a whole lot of issues confronting drivers and owner-operators today. Since the pandemic, there have been basically all kinds of challenges. This year's no different. It's basically if you want a topic or obstacle confronting trucking, just pick one. We wanted to get more information for our driver listeners, so we invited the OOIDA Director of Legislative Affairs, Bryce Mungeon, to be on the show with us today to discuss the issues and what drivers need to know. OOIDA offers representation, information, education, benefits, and savings to small trucking companies and professional truck drivers. Welcome, Bryce. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You know, I imagine you've been a super busy guy this year with all the issues, and people keep complaining about supply chain interruptions, but it seems the roadblocks keep coming from the lawmakers. I mean, take the biggest elephant in the room people are talking about, AB 5 in California. That's just one issue, and it's causing quite a mess. What is that doing to trucking companies, drivers, owner-operators? Is there a way to stop this freight train that seems to have gone off the rails?
Yeah, obviously this is something that seemingly everybody is talking about. And the thing that, unfortunately, I just have to keep saying with in a lot of these situations is we just don't know exactly how this is going to play out yet. But I think the word on this is uncertainty. So, that's what we're hearing from our members. That's the impression that we're getting from the state of California. So, as frustrating as it is, we're still kind of trying to figure out how exactly this is going to play out. But regardless, even the uncertainty itself is problematic and is causing those disruptions and those problems that you mentioned for owner-operators, for small carriers, and for large carriers.
Yeah. And from what I understand, there were some industries, professions that I guess were exempt, like realtors and attorneys. Why didn't you get that?
I think it's a bit of an understatement to say some industries were exempt. It seems at this point it's almost like trucking is the only industry that wasn't exempt from this law. So you look at how it went down is with the original AB 5, there were some exemptions for some professions and some industries. The state legislature enacted kind of a follow-up bill to AB 5 that went and exempted some additional industries and additional professions. Then you had the ballot measure in California where voters basically exempted Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, and other quote-unquote gig economy workers. So after we've worked through all of those different exemptions, it's like, okay, so what's left? And, like you said, why was trucking not exempt? I think really so much of it and almost all of it comes down to the politics of it. I think those other industries were able to, they have the connections of the lawmakers who, we're willing to go out there for them. And I also think that, part of the reason is a lot of the push for, AB 5 does come from the unions and the labor side of the industry. And I think that's a line that lawmakers in California didn't want to cross. But I also do think in part it is fair to say that some of it's resulting from what we've seen happening in the ports in California with, truckers that are taken advantage of and are misclassified. So I think, in this situation, what you had was kind of a kernel of truth or kind of a real issue that does need to be addressed. But then you have this AB 5 that just goes way, way too far in trying to do that. So I think it's the number of factors at play, but the bottom line is that, trucking is one of the industries that's where the law is still going to apply.
And it seems like California lawmakers are cutting off their nose to spite their face because their agriculture depends on trucking. Trucks need to come in to get the produce. Trucks need to leave so that they can distribute it around the country. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, no, we don't think it does. And I think the the real issue that we have, the real issue that we have is the enactment of the law. To be sure, we're opposed to AB 5. But more than that, if in fact you're going to go forward with this idea that isn't a good idea, can you at least tell people what's going on or how it's going to be enforced or how you think it's going to apply? Mm-hmm. Because for all those industries, especially like you mentioned agriculture or all of the nation's goods that move through the ports, the bottom line is, even if you think this is going to be something good and will help to improve working conditions for drivers, why not tell people how it's going to work or how it's going to be applied to alleviate at least some of these disruptions or alleviate some of the confusion? So you're right. It seems like top to bottom, this is not being handled the right way, to say the least.
No, and I'd heard that this is retroactive to 2019. Is that true? So
that seems to be the case, at least as we have kind of heard. From the way that when the injunction was lifted, or now that the injunction was lifted, the law has been in place since it was enacted. So it kind of depends on how the state wants to enforce it. Conceivably, they could go back and try to enforce it in a way that is retroactive or would hold businesses accountable for if the state thinks they misclassified workers during the period when the law was when the injunction was in place. But again, I really do hate to say this because it's so frustrating for people who are looking for answers, but we just don't know yet. It comes down to how the state's going to try and interpret this, and then it would come down to, how would the state's argument be interpreted in the courts, and would it be successful? So again, I know it's just so frustrating for businesses and for owner-operators whose livelihoods depend on making decisions about the law, but that's just the frustration of the state kind of no guidance or information on it.
And uncertainty, you can't run businesses that way, and certainly not distributing goods. There have been so many interruptions, and all that's going to do is, I'm sure, drive up the prices, the profitability factor. That's not going to be there for small companies, owner-operators. It's impacting companies out of state. They don't know who the heck they can send into California. And I think there's also that fear that this scourge is going to spread across the country. Like, wow, what a great idea. Let's put it in this state, or maybe even make it a federal law. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also something we've heard a lot, kind of the question anyway, where does this head next? And I could be wrong, but part of me hopes that other states and the federal government would look at what's going on here and maybe take a beat and just say, do we really want to go forward with this? Is this really what we want to be doing? So certainly there's the possibility that this heads other places. There's definitely interest on the federal level, and in some ways with this being included, the ABC test that is being included in the PRO Act, which would change laws regarding union elections and labor organizing. We know that certainly other states may be interested in this. We know some states already have something very similar to the ABC test, like is in California. All that is to say that we are already, at least in what we're doing at the federal level, we're talking to lawmakers about these worker classification issues and the problems that the ABC test would create, so that if there is some movement on this, we're ready to push back on something that's as broad as this, and to make sure that small business truckers and employee drivers' views are known on the issue.
So for those who aren't familiar, AB 5 basically just redefines who's an employee and who's a contractor. Does it deviate from the IRS definition? Is that essentially what it is?
Yeah. So, and this is where you're right. Yes. The ABC test is a new classification test for workers. Mm-hmm. It differs from the IRS test, which uses a common law standard. It differentiates from the Fair Labor Standards Act tests, which also differentiates from the IRS test. And that's kind of where this gets confusing, is there's no one test for employees and independent contractors, but the ABC test is just a really pretty significant change in the problem for the owner operators of the trucking industry is that B prong of the ABC test. And so ABC test says you are an employee unless you can meet the 3 criteria of the ABC test. Right. And that B prong says, you can't be doing work basically in the same line of, you can't be doing the same work of the business you're working for. So if you're an owner operator leased to a carrier, it's difficult, you're doing the same kind of work. So it's difficult to, the issue is.
It's all so very confusing, and it's not at all what people need. Certainly, companies are having a tough enough time trying to make money with all of the burgeoning costs with diesel and everything else. It's just crazy. We want to unpack some more because there are just a bunch of topics we can talk about here. Yeah. Probably can't cover them all in an hour, but you are a wonderful source of information here. We're talking with Bryce Mungen. He's the Director of Legislative Affairs for OOIDA. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show here on TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned for more coming up.
Mallard Buildings always gives back to the community. At the recent Night at the Gatsby Gala, which was presented by McNeese to benefit the McNeese Athletic Foundation, Lee Malek donated over $23,000. His generosity and continued support will serve the student athletes, coaches, and support staffs well into the future. Lee Mallet is dedicated to building a better McNeese and a better Louisiana.
Be sure to catch the Truckers Network radio show with your host, Shelley Johnson, weekdays at 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on TNCRadio.live.
Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly. We're talking with Bryce Mungen, Director of Legislative Affairs for OOIDA. Bryce, we were discussing AB5 in our previous segment, and that's got everybody riled up. What went on in the Port of Oakland protests that we all heard about?
Yeah, so we saw that there were owner-operators and truckers working in the Port of Oakland who were upset about AB5. Looking like it's going into effect. These protests came up after the Supreme Court declined to hear the legal challenge against the case. So it's kind of opened the door for the law to be enforced. And really, it seems like these were drivers who felt their voices weren't being heard, and the state wasn't really understanding what this law was going to do to them and what it was going to do to their livelihood, really.
It is kind of amazing that lawmakers put these things out there, not knowing what the outcomes are going to be. It's almost like they live in the land of Oz or another dimension, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, and that's what's so frustrating about this is, obviously, we're gonna say this, but it's like if they would only listen to us, we know what we're talking about here. We could help them out and tell them what some of the effects of this are going to be. But that's kind of, and that's really been our approach, especially with this classification issue, is just that, there's just so many ways that any changes to the law can have an effect on drivers. So they need to be really careful as they're looking at these issues. They get really complex and really complicated. And if, I don't know if it's fortunately or unfortunately, I think kind of unfortunately for us, digging down into the details on these things doesn't always excite lawmakers or doesn't always excite the public, which is in some ways what lawmakers care about. So it's, how do you get their attention and keep their attention long enough so that they, care about the details and care about actually getting things right?
Exactly. Oh, my goodness. You've got a challenging job for sure. Tom, you said you had a question for Bryce.
Well, yeah, I want to follow that up. How do you go about doing your day-to-day stuff, Bryce? Is this, you spend the day knocking on senators' doors? How does this work on how you go about getting the information to the lawmakers about, what's good for the people who are part of OOIDA?
Yeah, and really, it happens in a lot of different ways. kind of speaking generally, about whether it's this classification issue or, talking about something else like truck parking, that we've been very proactive on. Kind of start with something like truck parking, we have something that we know is an issue and we have a solution, which is let's dedicate some more money to fund truck parking capacity. So in that instance, it's a matter of going around, getting in front of the House members' offices, getting in front of senators' offices, educating them on the issue, and educating them on what we think the solution should be. And on this issue like truck parking, we had a number of champions, but Congressman Mike Boss from Illinois has a background in trucking and really understood the issue. And, he was really, I can't say enough good things about him in the way he was willing to work with us and move this issue forward. And from there, it's just a matter of, after you've got that bill introduced, talking to other lawmakers' offices and saying, hey, here's this bill. Here's why you should support it. Here's why it's important for truckers. And I think that gets to another point, which is we really rely on our membership to get anything done here in Washington. We do that in a number of ways. It's, like I just said, going into offices, letting them know, hey, you have a couple hundred truckers in your district who will care about this issue. And, if you are willing to step up for them, we will make sure that they hear about that. And it's also us activating our members, to have them write emails to offices, have them call congressional offices to educate members about these issues. So it really is a lot of just education, building relationships with offices, to kind of, shift a little bit, talking about something like classification, talking about something like the PRO Act on the federal level, which would be, changing classification laws in some ways. That's something where, again, maybe we've had a conversation with an office about truck parking, but it's following up with them saying, hey, here's another issue that's important to us, and trying to get them to understand as much as possible about the details of classification in the trucking industry. So it's really a lot of education, but it's also leaning on our membership to help kind of create that political pressure and making sure that lawmakers understand there's a really large and important constituency that cares about these issues back home.
Do you find yourself surprised? You think nobody's going to care about this and they do, or you think everybody should care about this and they don't? I mean, how much of your job is, okay, that was pretty predictable, and how much of it is, oh my gosh, because the reason I ask that question is, from sitting out here, not in Washington, sometimes I look at these and think, how did nobody see this coming? Or is it, from your perspective, you think you've got them all educated and boom, they turn around and do something different anyway?
Yeah, it definitely goes both ways. I think, talking about something like truck parking, one of our other champions, Congresswoman Angie Craig from Minnesota, after she gotten, one of the reasons she said she wanted to get involved with this was because in, taking, family trips across the country, she saw that there are trucks parked all over shoulders. She saw filled rest areas. So this is something she saw herself. And so, there's a member that's tuned in to this issue and really understands it. So sometimes you're pleasantly surprised to see that there's members of Congress and there's some of their staff that really get these issues. Maybe they have a family member who's involved in trucking or something like that. So there are good surprises like that. On the flip side, what we're also up against is, interests on the other side of an issue. So while we may be going in there and trying to tell a lawmaker about what their trucker constituents care about, they may also have another constituent that owns a business that is on the opposite side of an issue that has their ear. So,
sure.
Everyone's trying to do the same thing in the same way we want to build those relationships. Other people are trying to build those relationships as well. So sometimes you're a little bit surprised, or maybe you at least disappointed, but you see where it's coming from when you know who else might be bending their ear.
Sure.
Bryce, I don't think anybody, at least some of us older folks can remember a time when things were this divided in the country on all sorts of different issues and so forth. Do you find yourself having to walk a thin line? Because obviously you don't care about, I don't think you care about whether or not a person's a Republican or Democrat. You care about the issue. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, 100%, absolutely.
So do you find yourself sometimes having to walk the line of, yeah, I know that those guys like this, but it's good for how do you, to me, that would be the hardest part of managing the job. That's why off air I said, I don't know whether you have the worst or the best job I've ever heard of, because I think that would be, right now, the way the world's structured right now, would be very difficult.
Yeah, it is difficult. And I think one of the things that I always try to do, and one of the things that I really love about working at OOIDA, is we're representing drivers. We're representing people who make their living behind the wheel. And I think that at least is a compelling and a very honest message when you go to lawmakers. We don't have a hidden agenda. So that's the one thing I do like, is being able to be straight when we're talking to congressional offices. And I think congressional offices do appreciate that as well. They know where, at least most of them know where we're coming from. And, kind of to jump off on, another issue, not to get too into the details, but you hear a lot about an alleged, driver shortage. We need to bring more people into the industry, things like that. And, we can go into an office and say, hey, we're talking to the people who, they're doing this for a living. They know it's, lack of good pay, lack of good working conditions. That's what we're hearing. That's what we've seen for years and for decades. So when you can go in and kind of give them that message, I think it does help to pull back a little bit of the politics of it. Because again, you're just trying to help the people who are doing something that's absolutely essential for the country and, for the nation's economy.
For sure. This country grinds to a halt without drivers. If there's no freight,
Absolutely.
Nothing happens. And it is amazing, and I keep saying this, no one noticed till there was a toilet paper shortage.
Yeah. I think that no one noticed, and it's almost like how quickly they forget.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very true. Oh, my goodness. Well, we have some more things that we'd like to unpack here, Bryce. I guess it's kind of like reach into a bag and say, oh, here's a topic, because there's so many.
Yeah.
But we do have to go to break here. We're talking with Bryce Mungen. He's the Director of Legislative Affairs for OOIDA. You're listening to the Truckers Network Radio Show. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly on TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned for more coming up. Budgeting tips for over-the-road truck drivers. Budgeting can be rather overwhelming at first. It requires a plan and self-discipline. But there's no need to be scared. Once you get the hang of budgeting, it'll become easy and will no longer feel like you're restrained from your finances. It's a good feeling to know exactly how much you're spending and where your money's going. Start budgeting today, and you'll begin to save money and see a difference in your finances. Here are some great budgeting tips for over-the-road truck drivers. Know your why. The first step to creating a budget is understanding your why. What is your reasoning for creating a budget? What do you want to accomplish? Are you trying to pay off debt? Are you trying to save for a big purchase? Or are you just wanting to be more conscious of your spending? Knowing your why before creating a budget will help motivate you and keep you on track. Set goals. Setting goals will help you achieve your why. To pay off debt or to save a specific amount, you need to know how much you need to be saving and budgeting each month. It's much easier to save and budget when you have a specific goal. Saving just to save does not always keep you motivated. Know your income. Since drivers typically get paid by the mail, drivers have a fluctuating income. Unless you have a dedicated route, your paychecks will vary. Drivers with a set income have a much easier time creating their budget because they know the exact amount they're bringing in every month. If you have a fluctuating income, it's best to know your baseline, meaning you need to know the bare minimum expenses that you need to cover every month. Analyze your spending. Next, you'll need to analyze your spending habits. You can do that by looking at your bank account and examining where you're spending most of your money. Are you spending most of your money at truck stops, fast food restaurants? Another great way to evaluate your spending is to make a list in a notebook or your cell phone for every purchase you make throughout the month. Keeping track of your spending will not only give you an idea of how much you're spending each month, it will also make you more mindful of your spending. Needs versus wants. When budgeting, it's important to know the difference between needs versus wants. Things you need as a truck driver: food, place to sleep, clothing, toiletries. Things you may want: entertainment, TV, video games, computers, Netflix or Hulu subscription, accessories for your rig. As a budgeter, you need to pay attention to your needs first and save for the things you want. Set a limit. Setting a spending limit is the best way to keep yourself from overspending. Write down all your necessary living expenses and keep in mind how much you want to save each month. Then determine how much you want to spend. A good method to help you set a limit is the envelope system. Budgeting takes time and self-discipline. It's not easy at first, but over time, it will become easier and easier.
This is Heath Sanders, and you're listening to TNCRadio.live.
Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly. We're talking with Bryce Mungen, who's the Director of Legislative Affairs for OOIDA. Bryce, there's so many topics we want to cover, but we have limited time. So I wanted to go with maybe the hottest ones. Truck parking is huge, and I'm puzzled as to why that isn't automatically put into an infrastructure bill. It's part of the infrastructure.
Yeah, no, that was extremely frustrating and extremely disappointing that truck parking was not included in the big bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed last year. So we're puzzled as well why lawmakers wouldn't want to do something we're as obvious as this. As we just before the break said, it felt like maybe this was a moment where what truckers do had finally broken through to enough members of Congress. So it was disappointing to see that this didn't get across the finish line there. But this is something that we've continued to work on. We are definitely have not given up on it. And the one encouraging thing now is we actually have seen movement in the House of Representatives on a truck parking bill. That bill I mentioned earlier, introduced by Congressman Mike Boss from Illinois. Is a bipartisan bill. We've got, pretty much a member from every corner of the ideological spectrum on the bill. So I think that does speak to at least there are some members seeing this as a truly nonpartisan issue and something that needs to get done. And just at the end of July, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee moved that bill forward, and that bill would dedicate federal funding for the expansion of truck parking. So, while it was really disappointing to see that it was left out of the big infrastructure bill, there is an opportunity for us to hopefully get something done here.
What is some of the pushback you've heard? You would think that parking would be something they'd automatically incorporate into improvements. Is it because of the lack of land? Is that why truck parking isn't planned, or is it up to individual communities? I guess maybe drivers wonder why. Yeah,
so I think on the on the question of why hasn't there been capacity expansion, it's a couple different issues, but it's kind of what you already said there. It's everyone agrees the lack of truck parking is a problem, that we should have more safe places for truckers to park, but no one wants to be the person who's like, okay, well, put it here. So there's always that struggle of it needs to get done, but not near me or not in my backyard. So you do see those challenges from the local level. I also think that when truck parking at the state level, as state and local governments are trying to determine how are we going to spend our money, and truck parking is up against things like adding a new highway lane or adding an interchange. Truck parking, it doesn't win out, and so. Right. over the years, it just doesn't make it to the top of the list. And so that's why we haven't seen we've seen hardly any funding dedicated toward capacity expansion. So when you have people who don't want it near them, and when you have states who have kind of failed to prioritize it, you just haven't seen enough built. And so that's why we've been pursuing the solution at the federal level to dedicate money to truck parking, because we know that states and other places, other levels of government recognize that the shortage is a problem. So if this money is dedicated for it, we know they'll be interested in it. But a large part of that problem all along has just been getting them to focus on it or getting them to prioritize it.
Well, I know it's confusing to drivers. They really have to kind of memorize what each state's requirements are. Some rest areas have limits on how long people can be there to rest. But yet everybody's pushing that drivers need to have their downtime and get rest.
Yeah, I know. There's at some point we had a good write-up in our landline on our publication, OOIDA's publication, about the different rules in different rest areas, about where you can park for a certain number of hours, where you can park overnight, what states prohibit overnight parking in their public areas. So that alone makes it challenging. But on the flip side, it should make it an obvious issue for lawmakers. It does make it easy to talk about. It's, when you tell someone, do you want someone to be safe? Do you want a driver to have access to a parking place when they feel like they need to take a break? It's just common sense. So I think that is why we've had some success, and definitely have had success. At least the bill's reached a point where it's passed through the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, is because it is such an obvious issue, and everyone wants truck drivers to be safe, and everyone wants to be safe on the road. They don't want someone who would rather be taking a rest having to continue driving. So at least I think that part of the message has gotten through.
So it's baby steps. We are making progress.
Mm-hmm.
Now, speed limiters, that's another hot topic. What are the lawmakers proposing with this exactly, and how crazy is this whole thing?
Yeah, so this speed limiter proposal is actually coming from FMCSA. So it's not coming from the congressional side in this instance, but what we have is FMCSA a few months ago now announced that they were revising their proposal from a few years ago to implement a speed limiter mandate. Back in 2016, FMCSA put forward a proposed rule to require basically all trucks to be equipped with and to use a speed limiter. The proposed rule didn't pick one specific speed. It threw out the ideas of 60, 65, and 68. But basically, that rule, would have looked at a single national speed limit for all, heavy-duty trucks. What happened more recently? So that rule, it was proposed under the Obama administration, went away or kind of went dormant under the Trump administration. But now we've seen FMCSA basically revive that rulemaking and say they want to move forward with it again. So where that stands now is they just had an initial comment period on this to gather feedback. At this point, they were kind of gathering more technical information on a mandate. For example, they wanted feedback on how would fleets actually set the speed limiter. What would the costs for a carrier or for a truck operator be to comply with this type of regulation? But really what it is, it's the first step in moving toward a speed limiter mandate.
Haven't there been a lot of studies that have said that's not a good idea? It actually causes more accidents?
Yeah, there have. And the crazy thing is when we talk to, so we've been, although this is, something taking place on the agency side of things, we're still educating lawmakers about this because we anticipate there may be an opportunity for lawmakers to weigh in. And so, we tell them the crazy thing is FMCSA isn't saying this rule will help to reduce crashes. Their reasoning on this is reducing truck speeds will help to reduce crash severity. So therefore, you're going to reduce the number of fatalities resulting from truck crashes. So you're right. Research has shown, and kind of common sense dictates, that if you have a truck that's speed limited to 60 or 65 miles an hour, and you're in Texas, for example, where the speed limit's 80 miles an hour and you have cars going 82, 85 miles an hour, you're going to have more crashes because you've got a 20, 25 mile an hour speed differentials between trucks and other vehicles out on the road. So you're right. Research has shown that, and that's one of the things that's so frustrating is how could you have a rule that is going to increase crashes?
Well, you'd think that they want to bring in human behavior and human reaction time, and certainly the four-wheelers have little or no patience for semis. Mm-hmm. And if there's a semi that's basically a slow-moving vehicle in that particular situation, they're going to do stupid things around that semi. And it's a recipe it's just bad news.
Yeah, it is, and it is just so frustrating to try and it's frustrating to be in the position to have to explain this. But again, I think that gets back to kind of talking about earlier. Do regulators in this instance understand what it's like for people? What it's like for truckers out on the road. If you talk to truckers, they'll tell you all the crazy stuff they've seen, and they'll tell you how other drivers behave around them. So, and that's part of what comes through, though, in the comment period. With this, with the comment period that just happened, there were, blanking on the exact number now, but I think over 15 or 16,000 comments, may have been even more than that, submitted to the docket, and we had over 2,000 comments alone submitted through our advocacy website and in our advocacy portal. So, that's why it's important for truckers to comment, is so they can tell them about all the crazy things that drivers will do with this.
And hopefully they'll listen. Because personally, I think any regulator that makes decisions about trucking, they need to go on a ride along for at least a couple weeks so they can see the best and worst case scenarios before they make stupid decisions.
Yeah. Well, they're supposed to listen. So we will see. And it's obviously something we'll be working really closely on.
Excellent. We have to take another break here, Bryce. We're talking with Bryce Mungeon. He's the Director of Legislative Affairs for OOIDA. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly. Stay tuned for more coming up.
This blog on TNCRadio.live is brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. 5 best scenic drives for truck drivers. One of the many benefits of being a truck driver is traveling the beautiful United States. Truck drivers spend their life on the road. Although they may get tired of driving, there's still routes and attractions most look forward to seeing. Whether it be cruising down the coast of California, driving in the Smoky Mountains, or passing through the Arizona desert, truck drivers all have their personal favorites. Here are the 5 most beautiful scenic drives rated by truck drivers. Pacific Coast Highway. The Pacific Coast in California, also called Highway 1, is one of the most iconic scenic drives in the United States. Driving along the Pacific Coast reminds you of a movie or TV show. It's about 650 miles long and runs from Capistrano Beach in Orange County to Leggett in northern Mendocino. San Juan Skyway. San Juan Skyway, a scenic byway in Colorado, is known for its million-dollar views. The byway goes across the San Juan National Forest and has provided truckers with beautiful views of the mountains and landscape. Beartooth Highway. Beartooth Highway in Montana is a 68-mile byway that runs through southwest Montana and northwest Wyoming and goes into Yellowstone National Park. Along this drive, you'll see one of the most diverse ecosystems accessible by vehicle in the United States. Keep in mind that the scenic highway closes in the winter due to adverse winter conditions and typically opens up on Memorial Day weekend. I-64 in West Virginia. West Virginia has some of the most beautiful landscapes on the East Coast. Driving down I-64 in West Virginia feels like you're in a painting. If you have time to stop along your truck route, check out Tamarack, located just off I-64 in Beckley, West Virginia. Tamarack is a unique culture center with art from local artisans and delicious food. If you want the full Appalachian experience, check out Tamarack. Utah's Route 12. Utah's Route 12 is one of the most scenic routes in the United States. It's often called the All-American Road. Also, there are 2 national parks at each end of the road, Bryce Canyon and Capitol Reef, and many other unique scenic views. This info blog was brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net.
Trucking Moves America Forward, or TMAF, is boosting the image of the industry by telling the story of trucking, and your story can be part of it. Upload a photo. Tell us what you love about trucking, or send us a story about a good deed or charitable act in trucking. Be sure to follow us on social media and contact us through truckingmovesamerica.com. That's truckingmovesamerica.com. Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show on TNCRadio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson with Tom Kelly. We're talking with Bryce Mungen, who's the Director of Legislative Affairs for OOIDA. OOIDA really gets things really moving in Washington for the trucking industry, Bryce. And your organization, from what I understand, was able to get a bill proposed that repeals the overtime exemption for people in the trucking industry. I understand that exemption actually dates back 84 years. That's amazing.
Yes, and so this goes all the way back to the original enactment of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And, you know, when they were debating that bill, they basically exempted truckers from the law's general requirement to pay overtime for when workers working over 40 hours in a week. So it's been around for a long time, and obviously the trucking industry has changed quite a bit, especially, you know, you look at deregulation in particular. So we know that working conditions have changed, the industry has changed, and so we think it is well past time to update this and, you know, make sure that drivers are paid like most other blue-collar workers who are paid overtime after working 40 hours in a week.
It's amazing that people in the trucking industry were exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act.
And so I think
I just wonder why.
Go ahead. And so if you look back at the, you know, part of the reason is that, you know, the thought was, given the nature of the job, you know, do you want to incentivize drivers to be working longer hours? So the thinking behind you know, putting this exemption in place is if you knew you were going to get paid you know, more if you work more than 40 hours in a week, then maybe, you know, I'd look to work more or drive a little bit more to get that overtime pay. So there was part of it may have been to try and eliminate an incentive to work longer hours in the week. But we know that, you know, through the years and just through the way things are now, you know, hours of service regulations and kind of the maximum working hours have become the working hours. So I think originally that's kind of why it was done, but it doesn't make much sense anymore.
No. And Unfortunately, bad laws or laws that need to be changed never seem to get changed. So bravo to your organization for getting this in front of lawmakers and getting them to do something. That's excellent.
Yeah, and it's something that go ahead.
No, go ahead, Bryce. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, and I think this is something that we've been working on for a long time, and it's one of those issues. Again, you'd think lawmakers would care about it. It's a matter we think of basic fairness, that, you know, drivers should be paid like other workers, and there's no reason they should be exempt. So I think this kind of shows, you know, talking before about like how does advocacy done, or what's the work that we do look like, and most of the time it is a long game. You know, it's frustrating that things can't get done quickly sometimes, but it is about being persistent. It is about building relationships, and it is about continually educating members so that when you do have an opportunity, you know, you can finally move forward on something like this overtime repeal.
Very true. Oh, my goodness. I don't envy you in terms of the patience area. That's a virtue that I've never seemed to master, and I'm sure you have to use a lot of it. We have about 4 minutes left. I wanted to be able to have you plug OOIDA, where people can join. It's good for drivers and owner-operators and everything.
Yeah, so, and I think that's, I know at the top of the show you mentioned it, but we do so much for small business truckers and for professional drivers. A lot of what we do is on the government relations side and what we do here in Washington, but a whole lot of it is also just what we do through business services, through compliance assistance. So it's kind of, like a one-stop shop for small business truckers who, just need help. Maybe they're thinking about getting started in the industry and trying to figure out what they should be doing. So, our website, OOIDA.com, is where drivers can go if they're interested and would like to become a member. I just think it is an incredible resource for drivers. It's difficult for me as someone who works in Washington, and it is it's my job to try to figure out what's going on. It's difficult to figure out all these regulations and what you're supposed to be doing. So I think that's just a really great thing that our organization does, is to help truckers make sense of this. And then if I could also put a plug in for our advocacy website, which is fightingfortruckers.com. And that's, for anyone, member or non-member, you can go there and check out what we're working on the, the legislative front, on the regulatory front. You can sign up with your email there to get our alerts. So if there's an issue that's coming up, we can tell you about it and also help you take action on it. We make it as easy as just putting in your information and clicking a button to send a message, or putting in your own custom message to your lawmaker. Or, as I said earlier, we had over 2,000 comments submitted to the docket on that speed limiter rule. It was really encouraging to see, and those weren't form letters. Those were all truckers who went in and put in their own message to send to FMCSA on this issue. So fightingfortruckers.com, a great way to stay on top of what we're doing and a great way to get involved.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bryce, for being on the show. You've been a wealth of information and clarified a lot of issues. And I hope you've gotten some people motivated to join your organization, to get involved, and to make a change. This is terrific.
Yes, no, thank you so much for having me on, and we really appreciate the chance.
You've been listening to the Truckers Network radio show here on TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned for more coming up. Thank you for listening to another great interview on TNCRadio.live and the Truckers Network radio show. All of the material you hear on TNCRadio.live, on our website, our broadcasts, or our podcasts are copyrighted. There can be no distribution without the express consent of TNCRadio.live and its partners. For inquiries, write us at info@tncradio.live. Thank you for listening to another great interview on TNCRadio.live and the Truckers Network radio show. All of the material you hear on TNCRadio.live, on our website, our broadcasts, or our podcasts are copyrighted. There can be no distribution without the express consent of TNCRadio.live and its partners. For inquiries, write us at info@tncradio.live. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast of the Truckers Network Radio Show. 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 Network Radio.